Hi, good morning, everyone. So, hi, welcome to good morning and welcome to everyone who's here in the Zoom room. Also, I know that we are being streamed live for the on the Facebook pages of My Stigma Ba Research and also sa Camp Pag-ayo. So please, if you are watching this on Facebook, please share this live. Uh, Tune in because we have a very important research that we're going to be talking about today for this dissemination program. So to everyone in the Zoom room, welcome to the My Stigma Ba Project Dissemination Forum. I am Brian, but today, in this form, I am PLHIV, and I'll be your host for today. This My Stigma Ba, or MSB research study, began in August this year, and it aims to establish an understanding of the context of LGBTQIA plus and HIV related stigma in the Philippines. So all of us who are part of this, especially the researchers, are hopeful that the results of this pioneering study will be used to inform the policies of government and non-government organizations for the promotion of health practices in the country and, of course, in the region. Perhaps what is unique to this research study is that there is a creative output that was created and formed from the themes taken, gleaned from the research results. So we hope that you've all been signed up for either the morning or evening screenings tomorrow. Um, I think we can provide a link maybe in the chat if people don't know what that is or need to sign in today or I guess log in, sign up for tomorrow. So it's either at 10 a.m. or 7 p.m. So let's get this forum formally started with opening remarks to be delivered by the Culture and Arts Manager of the Philippines, or CAMP, Pag-ayo's Executive Director, Mr. Ian Felix Alquiros. Hi, Sir Ian.
Hi, Clea. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In the center of all our HIV advocacy work is our goal of contributing to an enabling environment by addressing barriers to access, including stigma and gender-related barriers to services. These are all aimed at promoting sustainable services for key populations at scale to stop HIV transmissions and AIDS-related deaths by 2030. December 9 and 10 is the culmination of a 4-month project called My Stigma Ba, or Is There Stigma? Specifically, this research project answers the question of in what ways is HIV stigma experienced in the Philippines by men who have sex with men, transgender women, and their families. An equally important question is in what way does this stigma hinder HIV awareness and testing? We at Camp Pag-ayo is full of gratitude for the opportunity and the trust given to us to be able to investigate and provide empirical data on the Filipino context of HIV and LGBT-related stigma. We are in awe and at the amount of insights and data that we have confirmed and produced in this project. We hope that this data will invigorate our resolve to continue our work for our communities. So in behalf of the Global Fund Multi-Country Grants KIPA program, the Australian Federation of AIDS Organization, AFAO, the primary recipient, the LoveYourself Incorporated, the Philippine sub-recipient, and Camp Pag-ayo Incorporated, the project proponent, together with our whole research team, all the research interviewers, the data analysts, transcribers, and translators coming from all the corners of the Philippines. We welcome you all to the My Stigma Ba Dissemination Forum. May we have an educational and insightful interaction this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sir Ian. Thank you. Again, I just want to tell everyone, welcome to the My Stigma Ba dissemination I guess, forum that we're going to be having today. So before I talk about the rundown on how this forum will be facilitated and the schedule, I would like to send our gratitude to the various organizations who have made this research possible and who are with us in this Zoom session right now. I see a lot of familiar names and faces, especially members and leaders of the advocacy for HIV awareness and treatment. So welcome, and we're glad that you're here. Also, our many thanks to the experts from various partner organizations who are also here to find out about what treasures this My Stigma Ba or Is There Stigma MSP research study may yield to the HIV programs advocacy. So I think right now, I just want to say thank you for being here and thank you to all our partners. And we're glad that we're doing this dissemination forum. Now, we're going to be looking at the program flow and the rundown of how this forum will be facilitated and done. We'll be flashing the slide or the schedule for today's forum. Right. So today is the My Stigma Ba Dissemination Forum. The program will be we have the welcome remarks, and then we have the research background and output, and then our Q&A. So we will denote 30 minutes to our lead researcher, Mr. Gideon Bendicion, for the discussion of the research results. After which, we're going to be devoting 40 minutes. 40 minutes to our lead researcher, Mr. Gideon Bendicion, and he will be discussing the research results, after which we will have a 15-minute moderated Q&A with our esteemed panel. So we will invite the other researchers to be part of this panel, and we will have a 15-minute Q&A. Then there will be another 15 minutes from our lead researcher for additional or bonus information gleaned from the MSB study, followed by another brief 5-minute Q&A. And then we cap it off with a 15-minute research recommendation from Dr. John Fontilla. So now, because we're going to be diving in directly into this research, we're going to begin to sink our teeth into the meat of this research. I would like to turn the floor over to the lead researcher of the My Stigma Ba project, Mr. Gideon Bendicion. And then if all the participants who are part of this Zoom chat or Zoom call, if you have any questions that you have as Mr. Bendicion is talking about the research, take note of them and then we'll answer them later for the Q&A. So Mr. Gids, turning it over to you.
Hi, Clea. Nice to see you.
Oh, it's nice to see you too.
I'm so happy you could be here, and I want to thank everybody who took their time to be here today. We're really honored by your presence. Now, let me just try to share my screen. Can the admin allow me to share my screen? Sharing screen. Okay, there. Thank you. All right, everybody. So the project is entitled May Stigma Ba, HIV Stigma in the Philippine Context 2021. Overview of my presentation, we're going to be talking about the study design and rationale. We'll go through the method of the study, the results and the analysis. And as Clea mentioned earlier, there will be a supplementary analysis, a bonus analysis, and then there will be programmatic recommendations. And while we have formal portions allocated for question and answer, I'd like to give people an opportunity to ask questions, if you have any, about the method and about other themes. So even if there are no specific Q&A portions allocated for that, please just type your questions in the chat. And at the end of each section, I'll ask Clea if there are any questions about it, and we'll try to answer all of your questions so that you don't have to wait a long time to get your questions answered. Okay, what's happening? So, what is stigma? The concept of stigma began with the early Greeks, where literally burned, marked on certain people. And the reason that they burned marks on people was to inform the rest of society that these people were disgusting, unclean, ritually polluted. So it taught the rest of society who they needed to avoid or who they needed to keep at arm's length. In research, the concept of stigma has been applied to many diverse phenomena, including cancer, mental illness, exotic dancing, and of course, HIV. But where exactly is stigma? The research has conceptualized stigma as possibly being inside of people in terms of how people feel or how people think. Some of the research has looked at stigma in terms of behaviors, what people do, what people say. And some of the literature has divided the stigma into the stigma of the people who are doing it, what the literature calls the perceivers of stigma, and also people who are recipients of stigma, what the literature calls the targets of stigma. And so sometimes the literature looks at the stigma that is experienced by these so-called targets. The literature also recognizes that sometimes stigma isn't enacted by certain people. It might be sort of independent of people in literature. Sometimes the literature has referred to this as public stigma, or sometimes called cultural stigma. And there's also a recognition that stigma can be done by institutions, perhaps by the court system, by the hospital system, perhaps by governments, perhaps by businesses or workplaces. This is a kind of institutional stigma. Now, who is affected by stigma? Is it just the so-called target? Is it just the person who is being marked or the person who is being shunned? How about the people who are related to the person who is being shunned? How about the people who are related to the targets? The literature sometimes calls this stigma by association. And how about their relationship? So not just the person that is associated with the target of stigma, but the relationship of those two people. Can that be affected by stigma? And ultimately, if you think about it, I mean, we think that the victims of stigma, the ones who are most affected by stigma, are the targets. But if you think about it, the ones enacting stigma, I mean, they could be spending their time doing something productive, but instead of that, they're using up their time to enact stigma. So in that sense, aren't they also affected by stigma? So if you think about it this way, is there anybody who isn't affected by stigma? Given these diverse ways that stigma can be conceptualized and these diverse ways that stigma can show up, we wanted to have a little bit of specificity in conceptualizing this project. And so we wanted to look at stigma in specific two ways, or in the two ways we thought we could have the most impact in relation to the HIV social phenomenon. Specifically, we wanted to look at stigma in relation to HIV testing. How it might get in the way of HIV testing. And secondly, we want to look at stigma in relation to talking about HIV, how stigma might get in the way of people talking about HIV. And we believe that these are two of the most important dimensions of stigma. And if we can impact these, we could make a big difference. The method of our study is a qualitative design. We conducted 51 in-depth interviews, 19 from men who have sex with men, 16 from transgender women, 16 from the parents of men who have sex with men or transgender women. And I just want to note that one audio of a parent interview was corrupted, so we used the field report for the analysis, but the rest, the audio was intact. Of course, because this is the time of the pandemic, we had to conduct all the interviews online, so technical issues, right? Now, the participants were purposively recruited from all over the Philippines, the National Capital Region, from Luzon, from Visayas, and from Mindanao. For the men who have sex with men and the transgender women, we deliberately recruited two cohorts. One is the young cohort, 18 to 29 years old, and we deliberately recruited a mature cohort, those who are 40 years old and above. And the reason that we did this is because we wanted a diversity of voices in our data. We didn't want the data to solely reflect the stigma experiences or views of one generation, perhaps. And so we wanted to diversify it. In the same way, we specifically recruited people who were tested for HIV, and we also recruited people who were not tested for HIV, just to ensure that everybody's voices and views get heard. With the parents, we specifically recruited 4 dads of men who have sex with men, and 4 moms of men who have sex with men, 4 dads of transgender women, and 4 moms of transgender women. What we asked the MSM and the transgender women, we asked them, who are the important people in your life? What do you usually talk about with them? Are there things you don't talk about with them? And the reason we did this was we wanted to set the stage for understanding what types of conversations people normally have, so that when we start asking about HIV conversations, then we have a point of comparison. Then we asked the parents, have you ever talked to your children, both your LGBT children and your heterosexual cisgender children, about their sexual orientation, their gender identity, or their gender expression? Have you ever talked to them about their relationships, their boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, etc.? Have you ever talked to your children about having sex? Have you ever talked to your children about HIV? And for all of those things, for each topic individually, we asked them, if you have, what led to the conversation? And can you recount the contents of the conversation? And if you haven't, did you want to? And if you wanted to talk about those things, but you didn't talk to them, why not? We asked everybody, what's HIV? What do you think HIV is? Who gets it and who doesn't? Why? Who needs to get tested and who doesn't? Why? And what does it mean when someone gets tested? Now, some people might wonder, why are you asking what HIV means to people? There is an objective medical definition of HIV, and there are objective standards for who we recommend to get tested and who is not recommended or may not need to get tested. However, people have idiosyncratic or community-based beliefs or representations about HIV and who needs it and who doesn't need it, or who needs to get tested and who doesn't need to get tested. And it is these idiosyncratic community-based representations that directly shape people's behavior rather than the objective medical understanding of HIV. And so we thought it was important to surface these representations, to surface these meanings, so that we can understand better what it is that people that are driving people's behavior. We asked the men who have sex with men and the transgender women, have you ever talked to anyone about HIV? If yes, with whom? What started the conversation? Can you recount the contents of the conversation? Have you ever wanted to talk to someone about HIV but didn't? Who did you want to talk to and why? Why didn't the conversation push through? Have you ever gotten tested? led to your getting tested? Can you recount what happened during testing? And have you ever wanted to get tested but didn't? Why did you want to get tested? And why didn't you get tested? This is the research process. We began with data gathering, which had interviews and audio recordings. And it split out, and just to be clear, the audio, it was completely audio recording. There was no visual recording, so it protected participants' confidentiality. And then the process splits into two. The first part is the interviewers wrote field reports. That was a preliminary analysis of the data. And we also had group meetings where we analyzed the data together. So this sort of gives us a bird's eye view of the data. And these group analyses and field reports produced a thematic map. In parallel to this, the audio recordings were sent to a different team to transcribe and to translate. And this process, this data transformation process, produced a very detailed transcripts, which we then subjected to further validation, including this research process called coding, which is a kind of fine-grained analysis of the text. And by subjecting it to fine-grained analysis, we use that to validate and refine the thematic map. Now, today I'm going to be presenting to you the data, which is in English, given that we have an international audience. And so I wanted to just explain briefly how we translated the data. It must be noted that in Philippine languages, local words that can refer to LGBT identities have contested multiple meanings depending on usage. For example, bayot, bakla, binabae. Sometimes it can be used to refer to gay people, sometimes to trans people, sometimes to cross-dressing people, sometimes to effeminate people. And we didn't want to get into all those issues. So all of these words, we just translated them as LGBT. Pronouns in Philippine languages are gender neutral. For example, siya, it's neither masculine nor feminine. And so how we translated this was we used the third person plural to denote the singular pronoun, meaning we used they, them, their, but in most cases, we're referring to a singular. Except when the referent is explicitly gendered in a connected utterance. For example, my mom and her cat, because the mom is gendered as female. When an utterance has both a denotation and connotation, we selected the connotation. For example, hindi kayo magwalang hiya ay pangit yun. You could have translated it in two ways. Don't you do no shame, that's ugly. And don't you do shameful things, that's not good. So we chose the one that made a little bit more, was a little bit clearer in English. And in the translations, you're going to see that we use parentheses for vocal actions or for clarification. For example, if they laugh, and also if we wanted to clarify if the pronoun was a plural or singular, for example. We also use brackets for words that are required in English, but not found in the original utterance. For example, matalino ang pangalawa ko. If you just look at the words here, literally the only words that are in that utterance are my, second, and smart. But that wouldn't make sense in English. And so we filled in the words, but we made sure that the words that we filled in were in brackets. So you know exactly what was said and what wasn't said. And so you can judge the validity of the interpretation. We did some minor quote editing only in these cases to remove excessive stutters and repeated words that did not change the meaning of the utterance. When the meaning of utterance could be affected by these repeated words or stutters, we kept them in. We also removed the names of participants and sensitive information when possible. For example, some participants, without our prompting, gave us their address. They put it into the interview recording. And so things like that we removed from the transcript. And sometimes it's not possible to completely remove a name because the sentence won't make sense. So when that wasn't possible, we converted their names into a random letter. For example, si R ganito, or R did this. And in the presentation, you're going to see that sometimes there are ellipses. What that means is that there was the utterances were not in immediate succession. For example, the interviewer asked a question, the participant answered, and then they kind of go to a different topic, and then they go back to the same topic. So for the purposes of the presentation, we disconnected the utterances that were connected topically, and we separated them by ellipses. So when you see ellipses, it doesn't mean that participants trailed off or they lost their train of thought. It just means that we connected two parts that weren't successive in the transcript. And this project was approved by the Holy Angel University Institutional Review Board. So I just want to ask, does anybody have any questions about the method? Clea, were there any questions about the method? Nothing typed in the chat?
Gets no questions in the chat, but again, inviting everyone in the Zoom. Oh, we have one question, right?
Can you read it to me? Thank you.
From Sai. Hi, Sai. Good morning.
Hi, Sai.
From AFAO. Just would like to know why the KPs age are 30 to 39 years old were excluded in the study. So Sai would like to know why the 30 to 39 bracket was excluded from the study, or perhaps that was missed from the explanation. Yes.
That's a fantastic question. Our goal wasn't to exclude them. Our goal was to ensure that our cohorts would be of different generations. Because, for example, if you had a 29-year-old and then you had a 30-year-old, you could argue that they're the same generation. I mean, what's to say that, you know, that 1 year difference would be really meaningful? So we wanted to make sure that our data represented both the young and the mature. And so that's why we made this gap. But the goal wasn't to exclude the 30 to 39-year-olds. The goal was, given the limited budget, given the limited number of people we could interview, who could we recruit to ensure the diversity of voices?
Thank you, kids. Are we gonna move on to the next section, kids, or entertain one more question if ever?
We can entertain one more, but if there are none, I can move on.
So any more questions perhaps from the audience? Just one last call before we move on. None? All right.
Okay, great, thank you. So the results. So what affects HIV talk and testing? And broadly, I'd like to group our results into these categories. The first is beliefs about LGBT persons. Second is norms about sex, marriage, and procreation. Third is norms about conversation. The last is what HIV means and what HIV talk and testing mean, and together, how these impact HIV talk and testing. I'm having technological problems. It's freezing. Hold on. There, thank you. Okay. Yeah, how these four topics impact upon HIV talk and testing. So we asked parents, and this is the data that kind of showed up from the parent interviews. What is happening? Something's wrong. Okay. If you see a P, that refers to the participant. If you see an I, that refers to the interviewer. The parent said, regarding my child's state of being LGBT, in the beginning, I really couldn't accept it. The interviewer asked, yes, why did you not get along because of this? The participant said, because I really didn't know why they are like that. Because not to, like, there probably aren't any parents that want their child to become that, to be LGBT. From a different one, do you have any children that are LGBT? For example, bakla or silahis. These are some of the local words for LGBT. My second child is silahis. I didn't show him that I was feeling bad about it. I kept it to myself. My wife stopped me from showing this to my child. Was there a time that you talked with your child about something important or serious? Yes, I told them, I wish you had been a man. This is from a mother. I did not want to accept that my son was gay. My husband did not want to accept it. You could see that there was resentment. And when the son comes home for the weekend and acts in a way that isn't good, I tell him off. Can you not be like that? Things like that. So your reaction when you found out your child was LGBT was, okay, I'll let you be if that's what you want. Was it like that? And the father said, yes, I didn't ask about it anymore because if I did, I might beat her up. You can see from this set of quotes, there is a theme that LGBT persons are a disappointment or problematic. There's something wrong with having an LGBT child. As a consequence, LGBT persons have to compensate by achieving status, doing good, contributing to the family, finding a relationship, or be a certain way, like being hardworking or disciplined. So your child is LGBT, so what? I told her, study well so that you can show that even if you're LGBT, you have achieved something. You can see in the grammar, in the construction of the sentence, that it's, yeah, you're LGBT, yeah, that's what you are, but achieve something to kind of make up for it. This is from an MSM. When they said LGBT before, it meant that that's all you are, that you will amount to nothing. I became diligent in studying. I strived to finish. And the good thing is, I think I succeeded somewhat. I was able to earn respect because until now, I don't really experience being bullied. Now, I'd like to highlight this part where this participant connected earning respect with not being bullied. I mean, I'm sure wanting to be respected isn't just an LGBT concern. Everybody probably wants that. But if you start to see the way these ideas are being put together by LGBT persons, earning respect isn't an option. Because if you don't earn respect, you're gonna get hurt. And you'll see this in the next quote as well. What are people's beliefs about LGBT persons? Beliefs? Well, that depends. And that's why this needs to happen. Even if we are like this, even if we are LGBT, let's do some good, right? We need to do good around us to our fellow humans so that they don't discriminate against us, so that they don't bully us. You don't get to do good just because you want to do good. You have to do good, because otherwise you're gonna get hurt. Society is going to hurt you. So doing good becomes a compensatory mechanism, a way to kind of protect yourself from the danger that is inherent in the social context. What are the beliefs of the Kapampangan, that is a province in the Philippines, regarding LGBT or gay people? In our village, gays are successful. There's no chance that we would be unsuccessful or a failure. That's why for the Kapampangan, having a bisexual or gay child in the family is like winning a trophy. They treat gays as the breadwinner. The interviewer asked, is there anyone who doesn't share these beliefs? The participant said, yes, we, the bisexual and the gay men, we don't share these beliefs because we are humans too. We also have failures, we have unsuccessful days, so we are being pressured to provide. So we're not saying LGBT people are the only ones who want to provide for their family, but being LGBT in the Philippines, it seems like you don't have a choice. You have to provide. In the context of being a disappointment, in the context of being problematic, we are pressured to provide. What does it mean to you to be in a relationship? Well, when others are in a relationship, it's like, wow, they're really proud of the relationship. Why is that something for you to be proud about? Because you're gay, but you have a relationship. And I really want to highlight the construction of the sentence. You're gay, but you have a relationship. The use of the word but shows that these two ideas are kind of opposite in valence. Like if both things were positive, the word but wouldn't make sense. Like, I'm a good person, but I'm kind. That statement makes no sense because both those things are positive in valence. The only way for but to make sense is if one is negatively valenced. And so because you're gay, but you have a relationship, you see that gay is conducted negatively and the relationship compensates for this, for whatever reason gay is negative. So find a relationship to compensate. And this dad talking about his son's accomplishments. He's a very sensible guy. He says, I'm gay, but I'm gay, but I have discipline. So you see, it's the same thing, the same logic. Be a certain way. As a consequence, LGBT people have to tone it down. Be presentable, be discreet, be more manly, be more ladylike. I tell my child, you should be formal looking. You shouldn't be unpresentable or be in a way that people around you will disrespect or be rude to you. And so you can start to see being presentable isn't an option. You have to be this way. Isn't it that the LGBT out there that aren't formal, aren't they the ones that get ridiculed or judged? The interviewer asked, when you say formal, can you describe what you mean by that? The participant said, well, I really don't want them wearing makeup. I want them to be really formal, as if they were men, like their being LGBT is hidden. Unfortunately, my child is really out, wears makeup, dresses. You can't stop them no matter how angry you get. Who are usually the ones that get accepted in your province of Bicol? Probably those who are discreet. And we're going to skip to the end. How do you be discreet? It's pretty simple. Present yourself in a really manly way. Your clothes, don't fix them. Don't wear lip tint. So this is both being discreet and being more manly. My mom told me, I accept you as whatever you are if you're LGBT, as long as you don't bring us shame. Yes, we accept you, but there's a condition. Don't bring us shame. And so this participant, I didn't want to implicate my family in anything that would bring the family shame. And what are things that bring your family shame? The participant said, for example, dressing like a woman, wearing makeup. She didn't want to see us doing those things. This is from a trans woman. The younger LGBTQ persons that I guide, I teach them. Number one, you want to be respected, you need to be respectable. If you want to be trans women, you need to behave like a girl. Follow what it is to be a girl. Don't be a loud mess. So to sum up this section, LGBT persons grow up in a social context where we are considered a disappointment or a problem. In reaction or in response to that, LGBT persons have two ways to deal with it. One is to compensate or to fight it, and the other one is to kind of hide, to tone it down, pretend you're something else. Secondly, we're going to go to norms about sex, marriage, and procreation. What is sex for you? When a mom said sex, it's only done among married couples. Note the word only. Is sex important? Yes, for married couples. And when is sex acceptable? When you are married already. What does sex mean for you? Oh, it's given by God, made for having a relationship and having a family. So what is sex for? To make a family. So sex is understood in relation to procreation. For you, what does sex mean? This is for making, and then the first participant laughs, for making children. Second theme, LGBT persons grow up and live in a social context that believes sex, marriage, and procreation are necessarily linked. And so you might wonder, well, okay, don't we know this? I mean, especially the Philippines being a religious country. I mean, we know this. So what? Well, here's the thing. When parents look at their LGBT children, they know the LGBT person isn't going to get married. And they also know that that LGBT child is not going to be making babies. And so they don't see the LGBT child as ever going to have sex, because that LGBT child doesn't fit the parents' schema or understanding of what it means to have sex. If you're not getting married, well, you're not having sex. Even if you have this friend sleeping over, if you're not making babies, you're not having sex. As a consequence, parents don't talk to their LGBT children about sex because they don't see the LGBT children getting married or having sex or having babies. Now, if you don't talk about sex, how much harder will it be to talk about HIV? And because parents and their LGBT children have never talked about sex or HIV, it becomes extra hard to talk about it if it's in the context of the child needing to get an HIV test or testing positive or needing support. Like, imagine it from the perspective of the LGBT child, the adult child. And you're wondering, should I get tested? Or maybe you're feeling something, you're going, I think I need to get tested. And then you go, who can I talk to about this? Who can I lean on for support? And then when you kind of look in your social world, you look at all your relationships and you go, oh, well, my parents have never brought up the topic of sex. They've never brought up the topic of HIV. They're probably not going to be open to it. And then you start to have these interpretations or these cognitive appraisals. The people in your life are not open to it, are not going to be willing to support you because they've never ever talked about it. And so now that you're going to be bringing up this need, like, I need your help, I need you to come with me, or I want to talk about it, or I just tested positive, I really need somebody. Now when you need somebody, it becomes even harder, because if in your normal life you don't talk about sex in a neutral, normal context, how much more when now you have to talk about something when it's a problem. In fact, the only time that parents talk to their children about sex is when they're going to get mad at the child. Would you talk to your second child about their sexual experiences or partner? No, it's hard to explain or to say such things. Maybe the day will come that it can be talked about. When? When would it be possible to talk about it? The parent said, when I see that they have a partner and I see what kind of partner, so that if it's the wrong kind of partner, I can give them a lesson. What is the wrong kind of partner for your child? If the partner is a man, the same as my child, and that child was a transgender woman. So you start to see that there are these norms about marriage and procreation lead to a lack of talk about sex and HIV in the relationships of parents and their children. But that's not the only thing that stops people from talking. The next group we're going to look at are the norms about conversations. These are people's beliefs about when it's appropriate to have a conversation. So this is not about sex in particular. This is not about HIV in particular, but when is it appropriate to have a conversation about anything? And this is from a mixture of both parent and KP data, but mostly from the parents. There were a lot of conditions about the appropriateness of the topic, like from some of the MSM or the transgender women, they'd say things like, I can only talk about HIV with my LGBT friends, or only with the people who have gotten tested before. The topic has to be appropriate to the relationship. From the parents, there are a lot of conditions about interlocutor, the person that they're going to talk to, usually the child. The child needs to be in a good mood, needs to be comfortable. I can't bring up the conversation if they're not in a good mood. Or I don't want to say something that will lead them to doing something harmful, like committing suicide or not coming home. There were a lot of conditions about themselves. I don't want to engage in a conversation that will make me angry. I don't want to think about the possibility of negative outcomes. I don't want to disturb or pry, and I must be knowledgeable about a topic before I even bring up a topic. There were a bunch of conditions about outcomes. Something must change after the conversation. There must be a lesson. The relationship must be kept peaceful. Otherwise, I'm not going to talk about it. And there are special conditions such as if the topic is sensitive, the interlocutor must initiate. If the topic is sensitive, then we just don't talk about it. What are the implications of these? Even when parents would have been open to talking to their children about sex or HIV, they don't think they have the right to bring it up. Because I don't want to make my child uncomfortable. I don't want to make my child embarrassed. I don't know much about it. My child, especially the advocates, they probably know more about it than I do, so I'm not going to bring it up. That's a private, sensitive topic. Well, they've never brought it up, so why should I bring it up? If they want to talk about it, they should bring it up first. So just to kind of give you an idea of how this works in real life. So the parent doesn't talk about sex. And then the child believes, oh, because they've never talked about sex, then my parent is not open to such topics. And in response, the child will not bring up sex. And then the parent believes, oh, because they don't talk about sex, then it's a private topic. It's a sensitive topic. We can't talk about it. And because they've never talked about sex, they also cannot talk about HIV. The child will not bring up the topic of HIV. And then the parent believes they know better. I'll let them initiate. And so the parent doesn't bring up HIV as a topic. And then the child interprets the lack of talk about HIV as I can't talk to them about this. The net effect of all these conversational standards, of all these conditions for initiating conversations, is silence. Well-intentioned as people are, they don't talk. Earlier, when we were talking about the norms about sex and marriage and procreation, we tried to show you a mechanism by which, because of parents' beliefs about sex, they don't see their children as having sex, and so they don't feel the need to bring it up. Here, we're trying to show you a separate mechanism that even when parents want to talk about sex or HIV, because of their beliefs about when it's appropriate to have a conversation, the net effect is silence. Finally, we're going to look at what HIV means and what HIV talk and testing mean. Here, we specifically asked participants who get HIV, who do you think gets HIV and who needs to get tested? There's so many examples of these, that's why I'm not presenting the actual quotes, I'm just summarizing the content of the quotes for you. People who are not loyal and not faithful, people who are having sex with those that they don't know, who are not selective with their partner, who have multiple partners. Sorry, again, I don't know why this keeps happening. People who are having sex with just anybody, people who are selling their bodies, yeah, and so on, and LGBT persons. Now, who are the people, what does talking about HIV, or what does getting tested for HIV mean? In the Philippines, what's in people's minds is they'll only get tested if they are feeling something unusual, something like that. So the way the participants constructed, if you get tested, it means you must be feeling something. You don't just get tested because, you know, what, nothing. If you got tested, it means you are feeling something. Here, it's a big issue. If people found out that you had done that, gotten an HIV test, even if you just get a swab test, no one here will talk to you anymore. And that's just a swab test. Why? What does it mean if you were getting tested? It means that you are really feeling something. If, for example, a friend of yours would get tested for HIV, what would it mean about them? What kind of people are they? Honest answer, not filtering my words. If I saw someone and they said they were getting checked, I might doubt, hey, maybe they did something. I would judge them because it's not normal. I would maybe judge like, why is that? So you feel symptoms? And so testing is believed to be a sign that people are feeling something. As such, testing functionally serves as an admission in the Philippine social context. We're not saying that people are trying to admit something. It's just that it is understood in the community to be an admission that you are sick. What do you think of them, those who get an HIV test? Not that I'm being judgmental. They're probably exposed, or they're too active in engaging in risky behavior in sex. Plus, they're not secure about their partner. So you see, there's just the action of getting tested, and there's this whole realm of interpretations about what it means about that person got tested. Yeah, having too much sex, or you have no confidence in your partner. What will your family think of you if you brought up the topic of HIV? They will probably think, sister, what's up? Why do you have HIV? Why? Do you have HIV? Did you test positive? So it isn't just talking that is an admission. Sorry, it isn't just testing that is an admission. Even simply talking about HIV is treated in the community as an admission that you have HIV. What do you feel your mom would think of you if you talked about her with HIV? She would probably think I brought up the topic because I had sex. So you're either admitting that you're positive or you're admitting that you had sex just by talking about HIV. Thus, the HIV test is an admission that I am sick. But to be sick with this means that I am not loyal, not faithful, not careful, having sex with multiple partners, having sex with men, that I'm LGBT. Therefore, talking about HIV and taking an HIV test go against the need to compensate for being LGBT. So here we are as LGBT persons growing up in a context where we are thought of as a disappointment or as a problem, and we want to compensate. We want to make up for it by achieving status. But instead of achieving status by talking about HIV or getting an HIV test, we achieve notoriety. Instead, we prevent ourselves from being able to achieve status. And here we are as LGBT persons growing up in a social context where we are a problem or a disappointment, and we kind of want to hide it. We need to tone it down. Instead of toning it down by taking a test or by talking about HIV test, you broadcast to the world that you're sick. That's what it means to the community. And so it goes against these two mechanisms, the compensatory mechanism and the toning down mechanism. That's why HIV diagnosis is an additional, unbearable burden for LGBT persons. I'm 100% sure that if, for example, I tested positive, my parents would accept me fully. They won't be able to accept it. They said to me, we already gave you a pass to have a relationship with someone like you. We hope you don't add to it. The word add, they're pertaining to HIV status. But they told me that they already gave me a chance on this thing. So don't further destroy or burden the family. Is there anyone you would want to know about the results? None. I'd probably go to my friends who are doctors who can give me advice, and then I'll run away. And you can already see this in the quotes, but for participants, the impact of getting an HIV test is both on my reputation and my family's reputation. The impact isn't just on myself. So to sum this part up, LGBT persons are a disappointment and problematic, at least treated that way. And so we need to have compensatory behaviors and concealment behaviors. Sex, marriage, procreation are necessarily linked. And so there's a lack of sex talk. And due to all these norms about when it's appropriate to have a conversation, there's silence. When HIV is constructed as for people who have multiple partners, sex workers, or who are not careful. And so if you talk about it or you get tested, it functionally serves as an admission. And so because it's an admission, it goes against all these compensatory and concealment behaviors. So now you might ask, so when do HIV talk and testing occur? We have all these reasons for them not occurring. When do they occur? When it becomes a way to prove something. So it fits in with this because LGBT persons need to compensate. When it fits, when talking about HIV or getting tested fits into this compensatory mechanism, it can happen. I'm not saying that I had done something wrong. Well, maybe that's what it meant. But in some way, I was trying to prove something to my partner that I do not have HIV. I could really tell them, look at me, I am gay, I am sexually active, and I don't have HIV, right? When else does it occur? When it means something good about me. So you see, when it fits into this thing about achieving status, when it doesn't take away from this desire to compensate for being LGBT. the conversation like with your family members when you shared that you had gotten tested and the result was negative? Oh, my sister was happy. How about your parents? They were happy. And I think they had more respect for me when that happened. I think they respected me that our child hadn't lost her way because she's negative. I felt relief, I was happy and confident. I was confident to my boyfriend. You see, it wasn't that I was confident in myself. I was confident towards my boyfriend because I could definitively tell him that it was negative, that I'm still negative. When else do HIV talk and testing occur? When I'm supposed to be doing it. Oh, because I'm an advocate. That's how they see me. So of course they're going to ask me about HIV. Same thing. I'm an advocate, so I encourage them. I'm supposed to be doing it. It's what I was trained to do. When else do HIV talk and testing occur? When it's for a higher purpose. If you were to get tested now, who would you want to know that you were getting tested? I would post it on Facebook. I would want everyone to know because I want to be an example that there's nothing wrong with taking an HIV test so that the people who were scared to take the test will have more courage. I want to give them courage to say, look at her. She took the HIV test and wasn't afraid. Earlier, you mentioned that you have been an HIV advocate. Is this an important aspect of yourself? Yeah, you know why? Because more than 5 years ago, I was bedridden. I thought it was the end of me. And then all of a sudden, I did something to the Lord. I told the Lord, if you save me, I will offer my time to the advocacy to help others. So I was saved. And here I am. Since my recovery from hospitalization, I had been advocating. So people are able to talk about HIV when it serves a higher purpose. So our analysis, when you put all of these things together, when do HIV talk and testing occur? When social identity is enhanced. Now, when we use this phrase social identity, we don't mean it in the sense of Tajfel social identity theory. When we use social identity, what we mean is sort of like people's relational identity, like what is your reputation? What is your status in your standing in your community? And what do you think other people think about you? So when all of this, when your social identity is enhanced, if talking about HIV and getting tested for HIV can enhance your social identity, then HIV talk can happen or will happen, and HIV testing will happen. Conversely, when do HIV talk and testing not occur? When social identity is threatened. Earlier, we already saw that HIV talk and testing is an admission, is constructed in the community as an admission of something. But here we're going to start to see the quotes where participants explicitly say that that's the reason they didn't talk about HIV, or that's the reason they didn't get tested. Was there someone you wanted to talk to about HIV? No, of course, because if I ask other people about HIV and so on, they might think that I'm positive. So I'm embarrassed to look for someone to talk to about these things. So I just watch YouTube. You see, the fear of being treated as having admitted to having symptoms stops people from even talking about HIV. What time you wanted to get tested, but you didn't go through with it? Yeah, many says, why? Because it will be a shame for my family. We had just recently reconnected and they are very proud of me. I am the pride of my family. So this person didn't get tested because it would be a shame for the family. What was going through your mind when your friends were talking about their HIV test? I was thinking, I wondered if I would ever do that, but I'm afraid. I was afraid because I didn't trust the people conducting the test. What if they gossip about me? You know, they might say this or that. I'm afraid of that. So I said to myself, I'm not going to let myself go through that. And this participant has never been tested. Yeah, I didn't get the test because I didn't want to be judged. This participant got tested, but didn't want to come back to get her test result. What if I'm positive? Where will I go? Based on the film I saw, the HIV positive person was stoned. My God, what if I get home and they find out? Because we have neighbors who love gossiping. So this fear of gossip can stop some people from getting their test result. They've already gotten the test, but they're not coming back to get their test result. In this case, the participant eventually got her test result, but after a delay. Yes, my family was supportive and assisted me because this participant was HIV positive, but with the condition that I shouldn't tell anybody my status. They probably just didn't want to get dragged into ill repute when someone hears about me. So you can see when you sum all of these quotes together, that when talking about HIV or getting tested results in a threat to a person's social identity. Talking about HIV doesn't happen, and getting tested for HIV doesn't happen. Now, how about if social identity is neither threatened nor enhanced? What do you feel your family will think about you if you ever tell them that you get tested for HIV? Normal, because they know me. I've taken several tests, haven't I? So there's nothing new for them. My getting an HIV test is not new to them. So you see, in this context, it doesn't enhance, it doesn't mean anything good about the person, but neither is it a threat. It doesn't mean anything bad about the person either. It's just normal, nothing new. It's unremarkable. Same thing here. Again, it's something normal for me that I get tested for it, and everybody knows when I get tested for it. It doesn't mean anything. You said you were curious. Yeah, because I was already there. It just seemed convenient to get tested at the time. There was nothing to compromise. I lose nothing. There's no threat to me by doing that. Now, here's something that might be a little different. Have you and your partner talked about HIV? Yes, that kind of discussion will never go away, especially when we watch news about people getting sick with this or that. So sometimes we talk about that. Now, I'd like you to, I just want to highlight something about social identity. So in a conversation, there are two people, right? Person A and person B. And these two people, it is their social identity that is relevant in the moment of the conversation. So HIV talk or doesn't happen if the identity of person A gets threatened or the identity of person B gets threatened. However, it can happen, HIV talk can happen if they're going to talk about neither party, if they're going to talk about something else, like they're going to talk about news, they're going to talk about a media prompt. Whether it's positive or negative, no matter how scary the media prompt is, the talk about HIV can happen because it's not connected to the social identity of either interlocutor. It doesn't affect the social identity of either conversant. That, as such, they can talk about HIV when it's about something else, such as news or a media prompt. Same thing here. Have you ever talked to your mom about HIV? Yes, because our friend died of AIDS. I shared this with her. I showed her the picture of my friend. It's the same thing here. This is actually a very scary, serious conversation about HIV. But what enabled the conversation to happen was the fact that it was not about either person in the conversation. It was not about me. It was not about my mom. It was about someone else. And so this someone else is what allows the HIV conversation to happen. You'll even see this, the interviewer asked the participant, have you heard of HIV screening? And the participant was like, yes, I've had a friend. So talking about someone else. I've had a friend that gets tested for HIV and got screened for HIV. And the participant was like, wait a minute, I also got tested. But you notice that the impulse was not to talk about yourself. The impulse was to talk about someone else first. So when social identity is neither threatened nor enhanced, such as when it's about another, like a TV program or a media prompt, or when you're talking about someone else, then HIV talk can happen. But I really want to highlight this part about talking about someone else with HIV. We must remember that for a lot of people in the Philippines, the fear about getting tested is that the moment you get tested, people are gonna talk about you. Why is that? Because the kind of HIV conversation that is permitted in our cultural communities is when we talk about someone else. As we saw in this analysis, that if you talk about yourself, if it causes a threat to your identity, we're not going to do it. And how many times, how many opportunities do we have to talk about HIV in a way that can enhance our identities? And so the majority of times when we talk about HIV, it's in the context of this identity neutral way, when we're talking about other people. And so the majority, I would assert, the majority of HIV conversations happening in the Philippines is when it's about other people. Should we then be surprised that people have this view that if the moment I get tested for HIV, people are going to talk about me? Because this is the type of HIV conversation that people are exposed to. This is all we see in our social circles, in our communities. When social identity is neither threatened nor enhanced, HIV talk and testing can occur. I'd like to call this the normal mode of operating. Hold on. And this is the normal way. In normal times, this is what guides people's behavior. If it enhances our identity, we will talk about HIV, we will get tested. If it threatens our identity, we will not talk about HIV, we will not get tested. If it neither threatens nor enhances our identity, then HIV talk and testing are possible. This is the normal mode of operating. However, there is another mode of operating. We're calling this the emergency mode of operating. HIV talk or testing can occur when the quote's not coming out, hold on. HIV testing can occur when people experience symptoms. I was bleeding, I was having blood from my anus. So I was like, this is not normal. And he repeated it. This is not normal. This is unusual. When I realized this, I got tested immediately. And I'd like you to see the contrast. There's the normal way, and this is now the not normal way when you have symptoms, severe symptoms. This is reiterated by this participant. There's pus coming out of my private part. So then he got tested for HIV. When you talked about the PLHIV, you were afraid. Why? Of course, because that person was gay, and that person, the person who got sick. And I am also gay. My friends and I are also gay. We got nervous that this could happen to us, so we went and got tested. So emergency mode, when you, not just when you have severe symptoms, but when you know someone who tests positive. It's the same thing. I had a close friend, something happened between us and he died. He had the virus. So I was worried for myself. I immediately had myself tested. Have you ever talked about HIV with your friends? Yes. What leads to such conversation? Because a lot of our friends died of AIDS. So HIV talk and testing occur when there's a severe health scare. Someone I know got HIV, someone I know died of AIDS. We're calling this the emergency mode of operating because this is not the normal thing. And this happens when social identity is not salient. You're no longer worried about whether this is going to enhance your identity or it's going to be a threat to you. You don't care because, oh my gosh, there's blood coming out of my private part. I mean, what? I'm just going to get tested. or somebody I'm close to, I'm gonna get tested. Social identity gets superseded. So the two modes are normal mode of operating when social identity is salient in relation to HIV talk and testing, and the emergency mode when social identity is not salient for HIV talk or testing. Recommendations. So understanding now that there are two modes for the individual, there are two modes of operating in relation to HIV talk and testing. How might we increase HIV talk and HIV testing? Increase emergencies? Of course, that's not possible. So we don't have the power, or it's not ethical to try to intervene by increasing emergency mode of operating. The way is to increase testing through this normal mode of operating. When social identity is enhanced, HIV testing can occur. So let's promote discourses and messaging that link talking about HIV and getting tested for HIV with positive social identities, for example, with a higher purpose. When social identity is threatened, HIV talk doesn't happen, people don't get tested for HIV. And remember that HIV is understood to be, you're not careful, you have casual sex, you have multiple partners, or you're a sex worker. So, de-link HIV testing with risk perception. De-link it from this understanding that there's something wrong. Rather, make it routine, normal, and casual. Because if the identity is no longer threatened, then talking about HIV and getting tested for HIV become possible. And when social identity is neither enhanced nor threatened, talking about HIV can happen. So take advantage of neutral social identity situations to prompt HIV conversation. Let's create cultural activities, media prompts that enable people to talk about HIV in a neutral or positive way. And so that instead of talking about other people who just got it or who just died from it, we can start talking about HIV in a more neutral way. Let us deliberately create these prompts that will allow for a neutral social identity talk. Now, what is the significance of this? Remember from our conversation earlier about the perceptions of like who's open and who's not open. If I am a person who believes that I might be at risk for HIV and I want to get tested, or I'm a person living with HIV and I want support, when I look into my life, when I look at my friends, my relationships, my social circles, if I see that nobody is talking about HIV, the perception for me is, oh my gosh, nobody is open to this. I have nobody to lean on. But if I look into my life and I remember, oh, my mom was talking about sex. My mom's probably open to it. Oh, my boss was talking about HIV awareness and he didn't seem to be very judgmental about it. So when we look into our lives and we see that people are talking about it in a positive or at least neutral way, then the effect on the person is we feel that there are people in our lives that we can lean on, that there are people that we can lean on for social support. That ends the main analysis. We'd like to open it now to question and answer.
Right. So thank you, kids, for really going into detail and talking about the different findings of your research. Now, we will be having a 10-minute Q&A. We'll be also joined by our panel of researchers for My Stigma Ba. The team members are Angelique Villasanta and Algil Robles, and of course, and lead researcher Gids Bendicion, and also the AFAO Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Officer for SKPA, Country League for Malaysia and the Philippines, Dr. Jonathan Pag-ayo. So I'd like to invite Ms. Angelique, Ogil, Gids, and of course, Doc John to be here for the Q&A. Now, for the Q&A, we'll be opening the floor. We'll be calling those who will be using the raise hand option that's found on your screen. So as if you want to ask a question, please press the raise hand button. And then as your name is called, please turn on your microphone and camera if you feel comfortable and ask away. We request that you keep your microphones or audio on mute if you are not if you're not asking a question at the moment, so that we can reduce interference with the discussion and the Q&A with the panelists. And then for others, you may also type your questions in the chat box. We have limited time, so if you want, you can also send your questions to info@campinc.ph.org, and our panel will reply as soon as they can. So I think we can start with the Q&A. Oh, Jill, yes. We'll be again inviting Ms. Angelique, Jill, and Doc John. And to fully experience this Q&A better, please put your Zoom into speaker viewer so that you can see the spotlighted panel. So the floor is now open to questions. Let's have the panelists on focus. Thank you. So Angelique, Jill, and Doc John. Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. Good morning, pala. Good morning. So maybe questions from the participants who are in the Zoom. If you have any questions, comments, or even thoughts about the I guess the findings and the quotations that were highlighted by Gage during his presentation, please feel free to raise your hand and then we'll get to your question or even comment. Anyone within the Zoom?
Also, give us your feelings if you want to react to what Gids and the research results are. So feel free.
Actually, is it okay if I ask a question just to get the ball rolling? Because Gids, you mentioned, or maybe to all the panelists, you mentioned that in order for us to have a more open and safe way of approaching HIV talk and testing, there needs to be almost like it's neutral, meaning that it's not something that threatens or enhances the self. I guess from any of the researchers, exactly like how would that look like in terms of like situations where that can be fostered, that kind of environment where it's neutral to talk about HIV and HIV testing? Maybe anyone, maybe Jill, Angelique, Doc John, or Gids.
Sige, allow me to share my thoughts first. Thank you so much, Gids, also for that great presentation. Hello to the members of this team who made that analysis possible also. Neutrality is perhaps, for the lack of a better word, on our end, when you were analyzing. We really wanted people to understand that HIV testing is more of a health procedure. Because when we were doing the analysis, we also asked some control questions, if we were to speak in the language of quanti. And those control questions really asked them what they think of blood testing for diabetes. And we saw that the participants had a more open attitude towards talking about it, and they were more comfortable, no? Talagang to the level of how they speak about it, no? There were less pauses, their answers were more direct, and they had more to say about it, no? And apart from a lack of knowledge, we really interpreted that as them having some of those assumptions that Gids already mentioned when we talk about HIV testing. And so we really wanted to emphasize to people that getting tested for HIV is a matter of health. And so when we talk about health, ang kalusugan naman ay una sa lahat, no, walang kasarian, walang socioeconomic status. Everyone has the right to health. And so that's really one of what although it is present in our advocacies right now, no, it's really one of the narratives that we want to highlight. That people in a neutral sense can talk about HIV testing as a health procedure, that if you want to take care of yourself, if you know that you're sexually active, it's the right thing to do for caring for yourself and your partner as well. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. So it seems like having a neutral setting allows for the conversation to occur.
Yeah.
That's the one of the best situations where you can talk about HIV and it's not either positive or negative to your identity. Yeah.
And
Any
I'd like
other?
to add a little bit to that.
Yes, please.
And the reason that we had that whole discussion in the beginning about the norms about sex, the
Right.
reason that we can't even get to the HIV conversation is because conversations about sex are also not happening. So let's start by having these neutral conversations about sex. And let's set the stage for these types of health conversations in relation to sex. Because if we're not talking about sex, how can we talk about HIV?
Right. So just, yeah, having that conversation really helps in a neutral setting. Now, for anyone who's in the Zoom call, I know that maybe perhaps you different ideas came up when you were even hearing about the experiences of LGBTQ and trans individuals who were part of this study, or even their parents. If you have any thoughts or questions or comments, please raise your hand, and then we can ask the panelists that. Yes. Oh, uh, Purev Dulam. Hello. You mentioned that appreciate amazing work. The results were really heartbreaking. Yes, agreed. Anyone, maybe Doc John can talk about like just the results.
Prevdulam, or as we call her, Deluna, is one of our coworkers in the AFAO, and she comes from Mongolia. So thank you for joining us, and Deluna. Um, yeah, when I was talking to Deluna and all of our coworkers in AFAO, where we are like nine nationalities in the team, and um, she said something like, "I want to know what it is in the Philippines about the concepts of HIV testing with the LGBT community." And she said that also, when I was talking with her, that um, when we're talking about LGBT being feeling inadequate in a sense, and that we have to overcompensate for being LGBT much more if we get tested for HIV, is really heartbreaking, because a lot of times, that's why I also invited all the other partners of AFAO in the international arena, because we also want to see if there is similarities or differences in between countries. So we would love the opportunity to do this research as well with other partners in other countries as well.
Yeah. To see whether or not there are parallels, no, outside of the Philippines. Yeah, I agree.
Parallels or commonalities, or even differences, so that each of us will learn from each other.
Yeah, I just want to comment as I was listening to kids, the idea that because LGBTQ individuals are seen as inherently having negative social identities, to add the conversation of HIV is to make it double negative. It's almost like you're burying us even further in stigma. So we can't even talk about it at all because it's all about shame. We're being shamed for being LGBTQ. We have to compensate. And if you talk about HIV, you're going to be even more shamed because the question will be, do you have it? Are you being promiscuous? So it's almost as if where do we place ourselves? Where does this conversation occur? If that's the situation, right? So agreed. It's very heartbreaking. So I guess maybe other questions, maybe one more question so that we can wrap up this short Q&A and move on with this program. Yes, Sai. Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Hello, good
Um,
morning.
First of all, thank you so much for all this very informative and interesting study. I would like to know a bit more about the process of recruiting the respondents, particularly on the parents of the KPs. We know that recruiting KP is a bit easier compared to recruiting their parents. How did you convince the parents to be included in this study, and what kind of challenges did you face? Thank you.
Thank you, Sai. So to all our panelists, to Gids, Doc John, Ojil, and Angelique, anyone who wants to answer?
Oh, it was extremely difficult. But what we did was we used snowball sampling. We asked, after we first started by interviewing the KPs, and then afterwards we asked them if their parents would also be willing to be interviewed. So that was sort of one way of doing it. Another way was we reached out to our networks of friends and contacts, and then asked them if their parents would be willing to be interviewed. And one of the persistent recurring challenges we experienced was that mothers were very willing to be interviewed, but fathers less so. We had such difficulty finding fathers, even if they weren't, necessarily like, even if they accepted their children, they just didn't want to talk about it. So that was one of the challenges. I think one thing that really worked for us, though, is we were very clear that the interview was a safe space, that we just wanted to hear people's opinions. We weren't trying to test people like, do you know what stigma is? It wasn't about that. It was just, what is your view? How do you understand these things? And that enabled people to be more willing. Anyone else have any thoughts about Dr. John? You want to say something because you did a lot of the recruitment too?
Yeah, thank you, Saiti, for the question. Saiti is also one of our co-workers from AFAO, and he hails from Myanmar. So he's now in the Bangkok office of AFAO. It was really difficult. We had to talk to a lot of people within the community and even outside the community who were willing to be able to talk. And one thing we noticed, even among our friends who are LGBT, they didn't want to volunteer their parents. It's very difficult in the sense that, and a lot of the parents who we interviewed or were in the recruitment were actually people who we did not know, or had no access to, other than being referred to by our networks as well. And another thing that was difficult was actually looking for KP, the MSM, and TGW who were not tested. It's very difficult because in our networks, of course, a lot of the people in our networks have already been tested, whether they are young or old. And looking for people who were not tested and are KP was, beyond the reach of our available network. So we had to be really creative and even asking for help from our allies, non-LGBT, to, look for people that are KP at the same time are not yet tested. So it was really an all-out effort in finding our respondents, and we are very thankful for all the networks and all the people that we asked and are able to participate.
Thank you, Doc John, and thank you, kids. I have one more question before we end, and it was given anonymously, so we'll keep that identity anonymous. Question is, in terms of neutrality in HIV conversations, what are its implications as to how HIV counselors talk to clients? Good question, yeah. What in the process of questioning and counseling should be modified? And as a follow-up, how do we balance neutrality and empathy? Wow, good question. So I want to throw this to Gids, Doc John, Ojil, or maybe even Angelique.
Actually, I'd like to throw that to Angelique and
right,
Doc John.
Because there's talk about counseling and empathy and neutrality. Hi, Angelique.
Hi, Clea. Thank you so much for that. I think very important question. And I'd like to begin my response by saying that in the research that we conducted that we did not go so much into exploring what really happens in that counseling context. So later on, maybe Dr. John could talk a bit more about that. Um, but in terms of my response, I'd like to go back to the data that we had, like the key role really of that counseling context when a person is about to decide to get tested or during that moment or instance of testing and even after, that we notice the pattern of worry and rumination. And I'd want to tie it back to what Gids was talking about in relation to silence. And usually, rumination and worrying about testing is something that happens when you know that, or you feel like you can't talk to someone about it. And what does an individual do when they feel like they can't talk to someone about it? They make their own interpretation. So they go into that spiral. And because what's present is the shame and the stigma, that's what they spiral into. And I like to go back to particular data sets that I remember from the interviews that I conducted, that it's not like the stigma and the shame, it's not like for all. Like there were interviews that I conducted that showed alternative patterns of thinking, and maybe that's where we could go into in terms of intervention. For instance, one participant thought that what she held on to was that peace of mind. She thought that I'm doing this test in order to increase my peace of mind, in order to ensure that I am keeping my loved ones safe. And another discourse that we're seeing is also that self-care discourse. I'm doing this to take care of myself. And so in terms of like the question, like what can peer counselors do is maybe to increase messages like that. Doc John, do you want to add to that?
Oh, you're on mute, Doc John.
Sorry, thank you for that, Angelique. So I will be really mentioning that in my presentation in the next few minutes on programmatic recommendations. So in that I will a bit be preemptive about it and really mention that we need to really find out what type of counseling happens in during HIV counseling. So I am also one of the people who did train a lot of people in the Philippines on HIV counseling, and knowing about this research, it makes me really think that we really need to look into how our counselors at the moment are conversing with our clients, and maybe when we find out how to do how they do it, and maybe it's apparent for us to do a little bit more research and born out of this study on the way our counselors right now and our health service providers right now for HIV are doing their conversations. I don't want to preempt the next presentation by Gates on the bonus things because he will be discussing that. But I will also be discussing further on what the recommendations are for our HIV counselors.
So thank you, Doc John. And I just want to say thank you to Gids, to Ojil, and to Angelique for this very short but very meaty, again, Q&A for this research. So thank you. And also thank you to everyone who raised questions in the discussion. Now, in terms of having the bonus, we will, I guess, move on and move to the latter part. We will move on to talking about the recommendations already, right? So we're skipping over that. So we're going to be talking to, I'll turn the floor over to Doc John, and Doc John will be talking about the recommendations for this research. So, Doc John?
Good morning once again to everyone. So out of the research part, the research and the analysis, we deemed it very helpful or very important to not only tell the people about, tell you guys about what the research results were, but it's also very important what can we do out of the research findings. And there are two things that we will be doing about the research findings. Number one, today I will be discussing the programmatic recommendations born out of the My Stigma ba qualitative study. And tomorrow is a direct application of the My Stigma ba research analysis results that will be translated into art exposition through the use of video. So I hope that everyone can also join us tomorrow in the premiere of these videos that are born out of the research results of GIDS and the team. So I will proceed now to the My Stigma programmatic recommendations. Okay, so let me preface it as this first. Stigma on HIV testing is already prevalent and has been, been discussed over the years. And with the results of the My Stigma research, and as we've been already discussing over the years, we want it to be contained. And green represents like what is the main color for health, and the Department of Health as well. So we want to contain stigma on HIV so that we can have an increase in HIV testing rates. So how do we do this? How do we do this? Number one is to communicate. It has been emphasized in the research results that there is a seemingly lack of communication, not only between everyone, but especially with the lack of communication between the parent and the child. Okay. Number two is to unite. And I will be explaining that in a short while. And the third one is to develop. So these are what I call the triumvirate or the triangle for stamping out stigma on HIV testing. Okay, so number one is to communicate, which is what I call breaking the silence. So number one, to reduce stigma about HIV among MSM and transgender women, the research points out to begin by talking about sex and gender. So I'll divide it into two approaches. One is long-term and the other one is short-term or current. To effectively reduce stigma in the long term, there should be a change in norms about the MSM, transgender women, and the LGBT community. It has already been emphasized by GIDS that HIV is an add-on to the stigma about the LGBT community. So if you want to really make a standpoint about HIV stigma in the long term, we also must address the norms about the HIV, about the LGBT community, and norms about sex and gender as well. So long-term solutions such as teaching about sex, gender, and SOGI concepts for the general public can help in alleviating stigma by changing the norms, as I said. Short-term solutions can be interventions on improving communication between parents and their children, and modules can be designed and developed for parent-child communication interventions. So the research shows also that there are two types of conversations happening in HIV. One is retrospective and the other one is prospective. It is recommended to explore which type of communication style is better in the context of demand generation for HIV testing. So all the researchers and analysts say that through a mixed quantitative, qualitative research on which type, when utilized, whether it is retrospective or prospective type of conversation, can result to higher testing rates. So as with the MSB The results of this research then can contribute to in creating modules on communication that can be of use to the health service providers. So another strategy to breaking the silence is to effectively orchestrate a concerted effort in reducing HIV stigma. And the way to do that is to create a national stigma reduction communication plan. A nationwide implementation of this communication plan is very needed. So it's the objectives of which are to provide the right information and context on HIV stigma reduction through various media platforms and programs. So it's not just the HIV program, nor but it has to be a concerted effort that even the workplace program, even the Department of Energy should have stigma reduction communication programs and in the right information as well. And also to manage sources of disinformation that can deter people from taking the HIV test. So there is a need to create sources of information that are interactive, preferably providing peer support that can be accessed by people who want to get tested for HIV. Examples of which are chatbot, online and offline peer support, and hotlines. So the research points out the importance of social support, right? Social support is very much needed if we want to increase our HIV testing and decrease HIV stigma. So peer education, which is already being done in the Philippines right now, is one of the ways to provide social support. So in terms of programmatic recommendations, there is a need to sustain the hiring of peer educators who can provide online and offline support. So also with this is we are recommending to establish and strengthen a referral system for mental health services. So strengthen the HIV service delivery network to include multiple disciplines, not only mental health, but also like legal services and other services that can be of help to our clients and our community. So one of the recommendations is to package HIV testing as part of self-care. So the expansion and promotion of HIV self-testing can be explored to promote HIV testing as routinary, thereby facilitating a shift in attitude. So there's a need to change the perception of people that are taking the test that as promiscuous. So this can be done when we create a national stigma reduction communication plan. So promotional campaigns for HIV should focus more on promoting HIV testing as part of taking care of oneself. This was mentioned by our panel a while ago, and also from the conversation that in the discussion that we had with kids. So the research also shows that there is a need to dissociate or delink HIV testing to perception of being at risk. So Gids mentioned emergency and normal mode of communication. So because if we don't delink HIV to the perception of being at risk, then HIV testing rates will remain dependent on emergency mode. So HIV testing can be in normal mode if it's packaged as a routine test. So also we recommend that in the findings that a lot of the people interviewed see that confidentiality can can protect the person, but it can also be very isolated. So the research points out people feeling alone pre, during, and post-test, post-HIV testing. So there is a need to review current practices on maintaining confidentiality while providing support to the people getting tested. Okay, so number two, the second part of the recommendations is to unite or increase our perceived allies. As what was mentioned by Gids in his presentation, that stigma reduction programs should include allies and not just the key population, such as the MSM, the transgender women, or even the LGBT community. So there's a need to increase the number of perceived allies. So what we mean by perceived allies is that a person who wants to get tested, whether MSM or anyone who gets tested, know that even if they get tested, can get support, whether it's from their family or their friends or even people that they do not know. So the more support that we can give our clients and our community, the better. So it is recommended to include allies in creating support groups for peer educators and counselors. So this is a very significant part of our recommendations. Programs should be developed for parents and talking about sex, gender, and HIV. So it can be through a part of a demonstration project or a research for teaching parents about sex, gender, and HIV is recommended to study the way parents communicate to their children about these topics and design specific modules for the parents to suit their needs. So as with the research goes, analysis of the results of the demonstration project or research can provide insight into the development of better learning modules for the parents. So, since majority of the parents in the MSB research view sex in the context of marriage and procreation, we are recommending for the HIV program for parents to be aligned to the reproductive health and family planning program. So this is already existing with our Department of Health. And we also further recommend the modular development on communication for parents on gender, sex, and HIV. So the basic premise of developing these modules is on how to handle conversations about gender, sex, and HIV between parent and child. Okay. So again, as I said, modular development on communication for parents on gender, sex, and HIV needs to be done. So part of the recommendations is to include a script-based program, FAQs, or even a development of an app that the parent can use when doing or reviewing the way they communicate with their children. So, and the recommendation is to develop the modules in the local language. Okay. Apart from developing programs, it's also recommended to establish support groups for parents. So we first teach them on how to communicate, and the idea is if they already know how to communicate or have a thinking or mindset on how to communicate with their children, then the parents themselves can form support groups where they can talk with each other on how to communicate with their children regarding sex, gender, and HIV. So if there's a safe space for our parents to talk to each other about how they can communicate with their children, the better. So another part of that is mentioned by Gids in his presentation is about safe and neutral spaces. So safe and neutral spaces should be explored for everyone to talk about sex, gender, and HIV. So all types of media, offline and offline, are vital as these can provide the platforms for healthy discussion. So art can provide an important neutral ground in creating conversations about sex, gender, and HIV. I purposely put here what was done by CAMP, I think 2 years ago. It was a art exposition piece. Was done in the QC Memorials, QC City Hall, Quezon City Hall, where they had a freestanding art piece that everyone can view and thereby can cause conversation and is a neutral ground for discussion. So stigma reduction campaigns can be coordinated with artists and art-based associations for collaboration and exhibition for the general public. And lastly, in the tri-pronged schema or strategies for that can be done is to develop or capacitating our service providers. So the study did show the value of dissociating or delinking HIV testing to perception of being at risk. So as I said, if we don't delink HIV to the perception of being at risk, testing rates will be dependent on emergency mode. So HIV service providers must be made aware of the way they communicate to dissociate or delink HIV testing to being at risk. So we are recommending for further research on the types of communication patterns that will be beneficial for HIV counseling and testing. So a separate review or content analysis of current psychosocial support is needed to find out what is currently being done, how these practices are implemented, and what services are essential but are missing. So there is a need to capacitate our health service providers to build skills of their clients to cope with stress in encountering HIV, from testing, linkage to care, and treatment, including pervasive worry and rumination. So if the coping mechanisms of patients are addressed, this can likely diminish cases that are lost to follow-up. So as I said, there's a need to capacitate our health service providers. So existing modules on psychological first aid and other modalities can be tweaked for the HIV program. I know there's a lot of psychologists, including Clea here in the room. So I leave this up to you, and we're hoping that we can work with you in this endeavor. So training on psychosocial support modalities for HIV service providers can be beneficial not only for the clients, but for the providers themselves as part of the Caring for Carers program. So while the HIV program is largely backed by the epidemiologic data, there is a need to include markers to measure the quality of life. I saw Kuya Noel Palaypayon from the Epidemiology Bureau who is joining us today a while ago. So this is for you actually. So if there is, we are recommending for social markers, not only epidemiologic data, to be included in the monitoring and evaluation of our program, our HIV program. So the measurement of quality of life, or QOL, of the key population and PLHIVs is warranted. So so this means that there should be a process documentation, or the usage of stigma reduction quality improvement models can be employed in doing this. Because if there is evidence in the quality of life study that can show that the PLHIV community can live full and fruitful lives, this can break the perception that HIV is a death sentence. So if we can show that results, if we are able to do that, then perhaps this can also be a good way to reduce HIV stigma. So this can contribute to long-term stigma reduction programs. So that ends my presentation, and I'm very thankful for everyone for participating in my Stigma Ba.
Thank you, Doc John, for that wonderful recommendation. And I'm sure that sparked inspiration and possibilities of action in the minds and hearts of our fellow experts and advocates who are here with us today. So we have one more question that I'm going to ask again our panelists earlier, Ojil, Gids, and Angelique, and Doc John. One more question from J.O. from LoveYourself Inc. He says, thank you, and thank you, good day team. Thank you for this great contribution to the body of knowledge on HIV stigma among key populations. The question is, were there any significant geographically specific insights that came out of this study? Did it follow in the participants' insights that in urban settings where there are more sex-related stimuli, or say that third-party conversation starters, was it easier to talk about sex or HIV given geographic specific situations? So maybe anyone who can answer, Dr. John, Angelique, Ojil, or Kids?
That's something that we cannot answer at this point. We do have the data, but to give you a valid analysis of the geographical differences will take a bit more time so that we can properly sort all of the data.
All right. So thank you, Jaya, for that question. And so now I just want to open the floor to everyone that if you have any more questions you'd like to ask, please email at info@camp inc or campincph.org. So Sir Ian is going to be sharing our email. If you have any questions about the research that you would like to ask the research team, please email this this email address, and then the team will get back to you as soon as they can. So thank you, Sir Ian. Now for our closing remarks, I would like to call on a friend, a personal friend, the founder and executive director of Love Yourself Incorporated, Dr. Vin Pagtaghan. Hello, Vin. Hi, Doc Vin.
Hello, Clea. Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. So, basically, I just like to say good afternoon to everyone and share with you some of the insights that we've seen as service delivery providers. In Love Yourself, currently, we have 9,100 clients on treatment, and it's a very, very true what we've seen in the study that Camp did about stigma and discrimination. It's really very important that we determine these needs and we determine the stigma and the levels of stigma and discrimination so that we will be able to do the campaigns that we need, the interventions that we need to scale up already existing interventions which are effective, because there are. Unfortunately, the scale ups are not here yet, but hopefully with the support of the upcoming SKPA 2, the local Global Fund grant, EPIC Philippines, HF Philippines, who have been supportive of our project in Flourish by Love Yourself, which is our mental health access program. And of course, we were able to tap the support of CAMP for the May Stigma Ba project, and hopefully the campaigns that will come in the future will help ease the stigma and discrimination that we're feeling here in the Philippines. Many say that the Philippines is a very gay-friendly country, but it's really regional, it's really cultural, because the Philippines has many, many different types of subcultures, indigenous people, different social strata, and we need to create different programs for different types of people. They always say different strokes for different folks, because at the end of the day, we cannot create or generate motherhood interventions or motherhood programs because it would not fit everyone. So with this project that we're doing, we're creating long-term and short-term recommendations for project. And I think these are very crucial in the preparation of programs and interventions for the next coming years. So with that, thank you so much, Camp team and the whole AFAO team, and of course my SKPA Philippines, SKPA 1 Philippines team for the hard work and for creating this wonderful analysis and analysis and data that's so rich that we can get a lot of learnings from, and hopefully we can crunch the other things that we've been asked a while ago so that we'll be able to make more specific and more culturally appropriate interventions for our kababayans. And saying hello to our regional partners, mabuhay from the Philippines. I hope you're all well and healthy despite the pandemic, and hopefully we can see each other soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doc Vin. That was wonderful. Thank you. Now, before we end, just a few reminders for everyone before we exit the Zoom. There will be 2 screenings of the culmination performance of the My Stigma Ba research study tomorrow, December 10. One will be at 10 a.m. and then the other will be at 7 p.m. I am assuming that is our time, Philippines. So adjusted for other countries and all our regional partners. Now, the evening session, there's an additional thing about the evening session at 7. There will be an informal meet and greet / discussion of sorts post viewing at 7 p.m. with the actors and the creative team behind the performance. So I feel it's going to be very enriching when we have that conversation with the performers at 7 p.m. So I'm encouraging everyone to join. And registration links can be found on CAMPS and My Stigma Bas project Facebook pages. So we hope to see you all tomorrow. And also for everyone, please like and follow the pages of CAMP and My Stigma Ba project on Facebook. Your support means so much to the My Stigma Ba team and CAMP. And if you have any further questions again with regards to this research project, please email info@campincph.org. So again, this is your host, Clea T, wishing all of you a great day, a great weekend, and maybe a great holiday moving forward because it's that time of the year. Thank you for being with us and wishing you well. Wishing you well. Bye. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Ed.